And you're live on YouTube.
Okay. I should say, and prior to me, I guess about 12:30, 12:45, I was talking to Curtis, and the next thing I got a call from Dr. Keenan, and we talked, and we're both pretty much in agreement with this. I had talked to you earlier today, Kevin. He's on the line, I see. We have many of our policies have large financial implications. And especially when we talk about, well, they all do, but in particular, the ones where we increase the pay if you're leaving on the sick time up from $80 to $150.
Mm-hmm.
And also on the tuition, even though it doesn't say how much, even it doesn't say an amount, we probably, if we're going to have a policy, should probably have a line item somewhere in our budget that talks about tuition reimbursement. And so what I had talked to Kevin, and later it was amazing. I get a call from Dr. Keenan, and I had to ask Kevin, I said, maybe we need a financial implication of whenever we look at a policy that's going to cost us some money to find out whether it's, and I know I sound ungodly like a politician now, but whether it is revenue neutral or whether, you know, if it's a pure policy and it has nothing to do with finances, but if it's one that could cost us a couple $100,000, maybe $1 million, we probably need to have those figures before we can make a policy on it. I talked to Kevin. I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but it would appear that he agreed with me. I talked to Dr. Keenan. She called today, and it was interesting. She said the same thing before I brought it up. I found that interesting. And I see Dr. Keenan's on the phone. So is that iPhone Elizabeth meaning Dr. Keenan?
Yep, that's me.
Okay. So if I am misquoting you, please do it. But if we have there should probably be something financial on all these policies. And because of that, there might be 3 of these. I think some of these policies, it might be best, before we start talking about the policy per se, it might be best to bring these back to the full board for a discussion.
Yeah, and if I may speak, Dr. Cuneo, in terms of, I think that there's some unique factors here with these 3 policies, in that some of them have been existing in our current structure, and that we are also looking at some new pieces around it. But there's also historical context in terms of, when I talked to Dr. Cuneo, there, you know, like the pooling of the PTO time, that was something that had happened years ago. And so, and I'll say this, it's not like Dr. Cuneo is saying, no, we don't want to look at that again, right? It's that, how do we make sure when we look at this, that we look, the things that didn't work in the last go around, that we understand those things going forward. And then also, and then also the thing about these 2 is usually policies do not have financial impacts attached to them so much. And so these 3 are very unique, that there is that potential with that.
I am saying that we probably need to have the financial impact before we can look at finalize a policy. Yep. The other thing that I'm saying is on the paid time off, I personally think this is a great idea, but I think what we also need to do, I'm a strong believer, this is what happens when you get old. I'm a strong believer in always looking at the past history. We had Wendy, I don't know if you were there or not at that time. We had this policy at one time. And in 2003, 2004, one of those times, we had a problem with it, because back then we had an individual who was extremely sick. We had people pushing for them to donate all of their time so that they needed it. It got ugly because people were feeling pressured. They ended up coming and complaining. And at that time, the board at that time and the superintendent at that time said, we cannot have this kind of strife. And they just got rid of the policy. I'm not saying get rid of this policy. I'm not saying don't have this. I'm saying we probably need a discussion where we say, we know that there was problems in the past. We've looked at it, and then we're either going to agree with this or not agree with it. I just want to say that we looked at what happened in the past.
Right.
And personally, I think that's a good idea, but I want to say that I know what happened in the past, and we've got ways to stop that from happening now. That's all I'm saying.
Right. And I think that that's the spirit of this conversation is not that we're saying that there's going to be a like, we're not going to look at this. It's to review it with the full board, because 3 members on this policy committee making recommendations on the budget impact really does need to be a broader conversation and truly understanding what the contexts are with these policies, and that so that the board fully understands what their the impact might be, the potential impact of the financial pieces or the other pieces on the staff. So I think that your recommendation of bringing this to a board discussion and having more like a workshop model to discuss these policies would be beneficial, with bringing in the financial impact pieces too.
My belief is we have a pie so big, we as a board have to figure out how we're cutting that pie up financially.
Right.
I think these are great ideas. There's a lot of great ideas I think that we have that I'm not sure we can afford. I think as a board, we have to decide which of these we think are the best suited. I also, wow. I think we need to look at that sick time. I personally feel on that sick time going out, the $150 a day for sick time when you're leaving, that could get pretty expensive. Do we want to put a limit on this? I know there's a limit on it. I think because of the financial issues on that needs to be factored in. I'm not saying that should make our decision. I just think it needs to be one of the factors that are considered.
Yeah, and I think one of the other factors too is to think in terms of how much do we want to make sure we're investing in staff while they're here, and making sure that we are paying people that we can afford to pay the increases that we're negotiating right now, and making sure that we're paying, our commitment to the staff that are here instead of paying people when they leave.
If everybody's in agreement, and I don't want to be autocratic, that means GBBDF, GBO and GBOR, GCBDA and GCBDAR. I'm saying 101, 102, 103, 104. We probably need to have a discussion with the whole board because of the financial implications, and we need the financial implications first. I would recommend that if that's okay with everyone, the only one we deal with today is KK, visitors to a district property and events. But I'm only one member. I'd like to hear from everybody else on this committee.
I had some comments I think might be made before it's brought to the full board that might be worthwhile just hearing.
I'd love to hear it, Dr. Astor.
One or two grammatical things, but just regarding GBBDF, since you brought up something that I was not aware of, which is that we did used to have a paid time off donation policy in the past. When that is brought to the board, and I agree that's a great idea to have it brought to the entire board, I would just ask that as part of that presentation, we have some comment on any past issues with previous policies and what is being done to address those issues with the current policy. If that would include, of course, any sort of private employee information that might need to be addressed in executive session, but just a request that that be addressed. And
I agree. Thank you. I agree completely.
Then do we still want to go then through each of the policies briefly to talk about any other high level points you might have on them, of things that are not fiscal but more stylistic pieces that are a part of those?
I'm happy. I have some notes. I can just give them to you guys, but I'm happy to do it however it works for most folks.
Kevin, at this point, I want to see what everybody says in the amounts that occurred beforehand. That's what I would suggest, because otherwise I think we're just wasting time.
And I'd defer to Mr. Boyd. These are all his policies. So
Yeah.
he's
No,
he's the
I'm not
engineer, so.
saying that not good. I'm
Yeah.
not, I just think that we need to have any financial implications need to be present at all times on things. Not that makes them bad or good. I just think it's an important factor that we have to consider.
You know, if we wanted, if we are wanting to do like more of a more substantive, you know, sort of analysis of impact, I think that, you know, it's appropriate to pull them all at this point and then give us time to then actually work up, you know, what that looks like, look at some historical data, so then everyone can feel very informed about this.
That sounds good. And
Yeah, I agree with that.
And Mr. Boyd, could you go back? I'm going on memory on the paid time off donation, because we had that before and I thought that was a great deal. And then we had the one problem. Maybe if you could kind of find out, is there anything on that way back when that was? Because we have this written up as GBDF. I believe it was a completely new policy.
Mhm.
I'm wondering, was there there had to be a policy on this before?
We'll do.
Mhm.
So maybe I'll just make my comments very briefly. So some of them were just simply stylistic. For a number for 1.02 for the tuition reimbursement, there was just a change in narrative perspective in one of the paragraphs where we went from speaking in third person to second person. I think at some point the words like "you" must qualify. We went from speaking about the employees to speaking directly to them. And this is me being, you know, very nitpicky about.
That's good.
There were a few missing commas as well in certain areas, but that was pretty much it. But it was that change in tone primarily where I thought, well, that struck me as odd. On the on 1.03 and 1.04, since they're essentially the same policy for different professional groups, in the regulations, in the section about paternity leave, there was a comment about when two employees, when both parents are employees that are employed by the district, that I believe 40 days of combined parental leave would be offered to both, but it could not be taken at the same time. And my only thought there was, if we have a mother and father who have a baby, and now in those, you know, first 2 weeks or first several weeks, where you might want to actually have both parents at home, all hands on deck, that means that they can't do this because they can't take the leave at the same time. I just wanted to comment on that even before it's brought up to the board, mostly because I really don't want to forget about it. And because I think that the way this policy is written, it would make it very hard for parents of newborns or anybody having a newborn in the house to, you know, they basically have to take turns being at home.
That would especially be important if it's their first child.
Yes. So as a parent, I know it was good to have both parents at home at the same time. And I just wanted to address that. That was in the regulations under parental leave, I think, for both sections. So something that I hope would be addressed.
And we'll do some additional research on that to make sure that the thought was that we were trying to draft it because there are some limitations when it comes to FMLA in terms of like having FMLA time in the same household. So we'll make sure that we can get around that. We'll also make sure we sit down with Charles to go over that particular policy with them as well.
Right. Yeah. My hope would be we're just doing the best thing for the employees there, which is to let them both be home with the young child. Yeah. Thank you.
Curtis, did you have any comments on it?
No, I agree with the fact that I think that the board needs to look at this in totality, as well as the fact that I agree that we could have situations to where parents, particularly first child, there needs to be consideration given in reference to the nature of that particular need to be at home. Yeah, I think that we need to review that and make whatever corrections if necessary to that.
Thank you. And I guess from my perspective too, for the record, I think all three of these policies are very forward-thinking policies that the board has asked us to look at in terms of how do we support the employee experience. And I just think that, you know, some pieces of it saying how much can we all support and financial implications. And I think that that's where bringing the full board together is a really great way to resolve and hear all voices and to really say which ones do we really want to make sure we're prioritizing and which ones do we say that we feel like we can, you know, might have to relook at in the future.
Okay, then we want to head down to KK.
Yes, please.
Okay. So the backstory on KK, this was the one, if you recall the email, I think Dr. Asner and Dr. Cuneo, you were on with Director Moeller, where he shared some concerns with staff working in the partner district, where currently if a meeting is being held in a partner district on partner district property, and you have a situation where an individual present, so let's say there's an IEP meeting, and you do not have an administrator from the partner district there, and a guest in the IEP meeting becomes overly disruptive, there currently isn't a structure in place for us to ask that person to leave because it's not our district property, it's the partner district's property. And so in the past, we've had those issues arise. A partner district administrator, so let's say this was happening in Melville, a Melville administrator would be the one to ask the person who's being overly disruptive to the meeting for them to leave property. But we don't have that where if there's not a Melville administrator there and it's just our folks, structures in place where we could remove the individual. And so what was in Director Moeller's request was that we take a look at KK and Rita, if you want to scroll down right a little bit more, right there where it says disruptive conduct. This was the area that we were discussing. Now, the one sticky piece here is that it's not our building where it's happening. And so just taking the language and changing it where right now it talks about how we can ask them to leave district property and they're not allowed on district property. We can't make that call for the partner district. And so thinking in this disruptive conduct language, we have a couple avenues. One option is that we have some language where we talk specifically about district run meetings, that we can ask them to be excluded from district run meetings or events held on or off district property. That's one option that we could go. Another is that we could have some language in there that talks about how that they could ask people to leave in conjunction with the partner district, but that's kind of what we have currently. So wanted to bring this to the board policy committee for some discussion, some feedback, and what your thoughts are. Do we want to put language in here that really scopes it to just if it's district operated meetings that we in the policy give our staff the authority to exclude people from things that we're running, regardless of the location of it? Or do we really want to get into that dynamic between how we navigate with partner districts when issues arise on their property?
I have a question as we're going through this. It looks like the section here on disruptive conduct specifically talks about essentially banning people from being on district property. It wasn't clear to me that that was the intent of Mr. Mueller's, concern, as opposed to just being able to redirect the conversation. Well, maybe I misunderstood. Was it sort of telling, hey, listen, you can't come back here if you keep acting this way, versus giving our, a district staff the ability to end a meeting if it's not going appropriately?
Dr. Asner, I kind of believe it was the way I interpret it was both. Was one that we don't really have the, hey, we can ask you to leave and not come back, that's not currently a power that our staff has, but then also, yes, that the other component of it that we could end a meeting if behavior becomes abusive, disruptive, et cetera. if you shift from productive dialogue to more escalated. And so we could add language within disruptive conduct where we talk about, and again, that's why I went to disruptive conduct, because I think that's kind of where this would live, but it would be maybe its own separate paragraph where we're talking about if it occurs in a meeting that we are running off-site, that we give our staff the authority to end a meeting, and we also give our staff the authority to ask an individual to leave from that meeting if it's something that we are running off-site. Director Faulkner, you're on mute.
Okay, so did you hear the first things that I said at all?
No.
Okay. I said that it depended upon the nature of the conversation, first of all, if the disturbance or if the disagreement was pertaining to our particular input, or if it was something that was more related to the partnering district that also was a part of the meeting specifically, then of course they would have that autonomy to be able to ask an individual to leave. However, I think that perhaps we should look at including this kind of language into our contracts with our partner districts. That if in fact that we have this policy, that policy should be related to in those contracts specifically, so that partnering districts understand what lines we are particularly drawing as it pertains to this issue.
You know, that's an excellent idea, but I wonder if we could put that in either the partnership plan for each district.
So we're thinking about adding this to the partnership agreement. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah. Specifically there, because that would appear where it would belong. And I can't imagine a partner district disagreeing with this.
Right.
But this would give both people the power to bring this about. I think they would welcome this idea. And I don't mean to speak for the all partner districts, but it would seem this would be an excellent idea for them.
I have another thought as we're speaking about this. Again, this policy deals with visitors. My son's IP has at times been conducted virtually, his meetings. Do we have a policy addressing conduct and behavioral expectations during our meetings as opposed to just with visitors, or does this policy cover that as well?
Yeah, so whether it's in person or virtual, we're still considering them to be a visitor because they're visiting into our meeting. So for virtual IEPs, this has been the policy. KK has been what we've gone back to for disruptions.
Does it need to be more explicit in the policy? I'm just asking the question.
We could absolutely be more explicit in the policy about virtual attendance versus in-person attendance, because I know there have been circumstances where individuals, we're going to put you in the waiting room if you keep cutting everybody off, or we're going to put you on mute if you keep cutting everybody off, that we have to let other people speak.
Yes, yep, exactly.
So
and I think that would give it more explicitity so that, and that specific, to be able to say because of this policy, and it does specify Zoom meetings or virtual meetings.
My suggestion would be, I think when it comes to our policies, we really want to address what we can control through our policies. So I would recommend that we put some language in about our employees being allowed to end meetings. They can certainly do that. That's within their purview. And and then we can also reach out to our, partner districts to see if there's other sort of, if they want to address in their policies, and they could include in their policies, employees of special school district who are involved in meetings, and although that would then have to go district by district probably, but that's another possibility. I agree. I think we should very specifically address virtual and in-person conduct. But as we're doing, I'm just thinking, I'm just kind of going through what happens. So what happens if they end a meeting? What happens to the next meeting? And do we need to address in our policy what expectations should be set for that next meeting? Because of course we don't want to just have meetings.
Yeah, and that's some of it's where if we know that a meeting ended poorly, that we would then be more intentional about making sure partner district administration is able to attend as well if it's being hosted at the partner district. But yes, there might be other remedial pieces we want to put in.
As well as maybe escalating so that supervisors, directors,
Mhm.
and so on are present at the meeting so that they can provide additional support.
Okay. And so the goal today was really just to get your initial feedback on this, since this is one that was brought to us by Director Moeller. And then we'll craft some language around the feedback today. And then this policy will come back to the board policy committee in, what month is it? It's April, May. We'll come back in May and look at it again with some more spelled out language for more of that line by line feedback. But first wanted to get your thoughts on overall direction that we go with the nature of the policy before we got into that line by line. And you can catch all the commas that we miss and any other voice changes.
There's a lot of capital S's and B's and D's in there.
In this one, yes. Yep, we'll get on it. Any other thoughts or concerns with KK?
Kevin, you'll address all those grammatical and typo.
Yeah. Yeah, that'll be in the marked up version. This is still just the version that's currently live for KK. So it'll get all cleaned up.
I also want to speak really quickly when it comes to my comments on grammar and so forth. Please, everybody, feel free to disagree with me if you have an opposing opinion. It's it's style.
Then the only other thing that we had from a policy piece was we did kind of last board. Feels like it was a long time ago because I've had a lot of evening events. Tuesday this week, we talked about policy KC and BDDH in that meeting and kind of talked about for the community engagement plan, that piece, getting that moving. Did we want to talk more about KC and BDDH with this group?
KCBDH.
We can, although I'd like to see it. It wasn't on the agenda, so we'd have to just pull it up. I'm happy to speak about it.
I agree. I kind of like to see it first.
Yeah. So, do you want me to pull it up?
Yeah.
Okay. Give me 1 second. Or actually, Rita, if you go back to the board agenda from Tuesday. Scroll on down to first reading of board policies. Head on down. And so BDDH. And so this is the one that we looked at in March. And everything in here was the MSBA recommendations.
And this one is, if I remember right, this is required by law and we have a timeline to get this done, isn't it?
Yeah, this is all the ones that are based off of the omnibus bill that passed last legislative session. And so that was the whole grievance procedure piece. And then if you want to scroll down to so right there, this is the part about the agenda items. If you scroll a little bit more, Rita, it's also got the rules underneath it. So this is taken verbatim from statute.
Is there a way that we can see when we're doing this, how many of these things we already are doing in some way?
You mean like if the topic is already on the agenda and something the board's already talking about?
Yeah. In other words, the ability, I mean, many of these things we already do.
And that's the for item, right. So these are things we already do, but also item 1 under the rules here. What the MSBA documents talked about was if the resident is putting something on the board agenda, and let's say it's something the board is already addressing, that the board president may reach out to that individual and let them know, hey, we're already on top of this and here's what we're doing. Are you comfortable with us just lumping your conversation into this conversation that we were already having as opposed to having its own standalone item? There was a thought that a lot of this with that rule number 1, things might be able to be condensed or things might, the resident not realize that it's already being addressed somewhere.
Okay.
And then Rita, if you want to scroll a little bit more, the rules keep going.
Can you explain 13 for me? I'm trying to figure out what that means. The board may discuss the public business content of a presented agenda items, but is not required to decide any matter of public business or formulate any public policy as a result of the discussion. In other words, you can talk about, but you don't have to do anything?
That's correct. That's correct. The whole piece of this is that the public can bring something to the board's attention, but the board does not have to take any action on it one way or the other. Board doesn't have to indicate if they support or do not support what was being presented. It just means that the information was shared. So, and that's consistent with the legislation, was just that the public has the ability to bring something to the board's attention, but the board doesn't have to do anything with it if the board chooses not to.
And that's pretty much how we do public comment right now.
Mm-hmm.
This all looks fine to me. I mean, the most important language to me is in the first paragraph where it says that the whatever is being brought to our attention has to be related to board operation and governance. And I think that's to me the most important thing.
Right.
Or sorry, district operation and governance.
Yes.
And we make sure that we, I just want to make sure many times people come in with some very personal items and we can't discuss those, not in an open meeting.
Right. And that's why in here, if you look at item 5, so the board will place the agenda item in open or closed session, accordance with law and district policy. So depending on what it is, it may be placed on the agenda for closed session as opposed to open session because it is one of those protected topics that we can't talk about in an open meeting.
There shouldn't be any surprise items added to the agenda.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this was everything we were talking about with how the community engagement plan KC has to reference back to this process in BDDH, so that way we comply with the new state law. Which is why some districts have taken this and use this as a way to eliminate public comment, because they say, well, if the public can put something on the agenda, then do we really need public comment?
I'll say personally, I don't really see a big issue with this policy.
No.
I mean, I think it's fine. I think it's a good thing to have public, interests represented in our agenda. I can of course appreciate how it might get abused, but it seems to me like the procedures in place are pretty. I mean, they're addressing any concerns that I would have.
Mm-hmm. And the timing on this, because we just got this from MSBA at the very end of March, but it's been law. Well, they knew the new law was coming since June, so they've really spent a lot of time from a legal aspect of what's the best way to structure this so that it is going to be the most beneficial for the community and the district. And I believe from Tuesday, most of the questions that we had about KC were really questions about this process and BDDH. Did we want to look at KC again, or are you comfortable based off what we're seeing here in this policy?
Fine.
We're good?
Fine, look at it, or fine, we're fine with it.
Since you brought it up, let's take a look at it.
So Rita, if you want to go back to the agenda from Tuesday.
Yeah, the kid asked me if she was going to get any shots today. I said, well, since you mentioned it, I guess there's something that, since you reminded me.
Yep, you're right. You're still there. Just go over to the agenda item and scroll down. Yeah. And then KC. And this one was just kind of clarifying of definitions, talking about written communications to the board, and then the meat of it is all on page 2.
Can I just peruse through that and do families as well? Instead of parents? Okay.
Again, this one we were really trying to align, Wendy, directly with the statute.
Never mind then.
Yeah. And so that section there for board meetings, that's where you have the tie back to BDDH.
Should we include, since again, I appreciate we're trying to align with the statute, but should we include an additional paragraph stating that for the purposes of an SSD governance, we consider parents to include other guardian family members.
Mm-hmm.
Again, just thinking about how to address all concerns.
Mm-hmm.
I like that.
Yep, we can do that. Yep, and then everything there at the bottom of page 2 is kind of in line with what I presented on Tuesday.
I mean, just to open up the whole bag of monkeys here, should we have another policy just stating that when, for the purpose of complying with statute, SSD recognizes that while some statutes may refer to parents, we will consider that to refer to any legal guardian of a student? I mean, is that broad? Is the statement that broad? Should that be its own policy?
We could do that in the A's. That's an option. Let me look at some other districts and see what they've done. Ones that are trying to be more family centric, and see what they've done. A policy in the A's of common definitions. Any questions on KC?
No.
And so this is just that plan that we've got to get off and implemented by the end of June.
Okay. Most of this we already do.
Correct. And if you looked at the draft that I shared on Tuesday, pretty much everything in there was the things that you're already doing, that the board already participates in the PAC meetings, the board already attends the governing council meetings. The board already allows public comment. The board already allows written communications to go to the board. So there's much of those structures are already in place. And also, I didn't include it in the draft, but the PRC process is another piece that we could include in our community engagement plan, which is a unique thing to SSD that through that process, we probably get more community involvement than anybody else does.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing because that has such in-depth community feedback from governing council members, from the PAC, and from the SSD portion of it. So I agree with that.
Yeah, and then all that goes to the board. So it is a deep dive under the hood of the district. All right, that was the end of the agenda since we've moved those 1.01 through 1.04. Dr. Keenan, do you think this would move to the work study or business meeting in May?
I was just gonna ask Dr. Cuneo, since we have a couple of items on the agenda, I think we can see if we can change some of those, because I don't want the work study to be too long. But we could have this as a policy review and have it as one work study item. Does that sound okay?
Yes, I like that.
Okay. And then we'll also make sure that there's a presentation to accompany it, each one of them. And then kind of like we do with the format here, we'll have Mr. Boyd present the pieces of it, and then the financial pieces will be attached. And then we'll also, if there's any historical information that was discovered between now and that presentation, we'll add that in there too.
Okay.
All right.
All right, I think that wraps it up. Comfortable with adjourning?
Yes.
So
Thank
moved.
you. Thank you.
Everybody